In this lecture, we'll look at early life on Earth, by which I mean life in the first billion or so years after its formation. We're going to speculate, and evidence is consistent with this, the very first life formed about 4 or 3.9 billion years ago. If we move forward to 3.7 to 3.8 billion years ago, there's good geochemical evidence based on isotopic ratios for carbon-based life forms, simple metabolisms at work. These are single microscopic cells, not fossils as we would imagine with dinosaurs or large creatures. Fossils visible to the naked eye do not appear for billions of years. So this is a stage of very simple and primitive life. But a lot happened, and in total we're talking about half the Earth's entire history in this simplistic form of life. The key ingredient for life, beyond liquid water and carbon, is of course energy. All life requires an energy source. The energy for the Earth, of course, comes from the sun, the fundamental source for life. But there are other energy sources. The Earth is a geologically active planet, and some of that energy comes from the interior. The rocky material has radioactive decay, and so that energy itself can be a heat source. In principle, in theory, and actually in practice, life can exist independent of the sun's radiation. Energy can also come from chemical means, from chemical imbalances, or from gradients of magnetic fields or electrical fields. There are many sources of energy. It's not clear which of these are necessary for biology. The sun's radiation is obviously the primary source. If we look at plants, we know they capture energy in the form of sunlight directly from the sun, and they use this energy to make sugars and rearrange carbon atoms in order to grow. Herbivores consume plants and use chemical reactions to break apart the plant matter, thereby indirectly utilizing the energy of the sun. And then omnivores and carnivores eat the herbivores, and their digestive systems break apart organic molecules and release energy that once again originally came from the sun. So in the flow chart of this process, if we consider our own diet as humans, whether we eat plants or animals, we are originally consuming energy that came from the sun. All living things, with the exception of some extremophiles, which we'll discuss a bit later, depend either directly or indirectly from energy produced in the sun. Another basic structural arrangement for life is a metabolism. At a cellular level, all food or energy sources look the same. Every living cell uses the same molecule, ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, for storing energy. Incidentally, this molecule shows the important role of the ingredient phosphorus, a chemical that's not one of the famous ingredients for life, which are carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, along with hydrogen. Phosphorus is probably the most important trace element necessary for life because of the pivotal role of phosphorus in this one molecule in storing energy. ATP drives the chemical reactions in cells that are fundamentally necessary for life, flexing muscles if it's a human, breaking apart organic molecules in much simpler creatures, transcribing RNA and DNA, and so on. The modern metabolism is the same chemical process at the microscopic level for all biological life, and this supports the idea that modern life evolved from a single common ancestor. We also have genetic evidence from the DNA and RNA molecules and their information storage that life had a single common ancestor. There may have possibly been multiple starts to life. In particular, because of the heavy bombardment, it's possible that life started and then was eradicated in a sterilizing huge impact on the Earth. That's a speculation that scientists have a lot of fun with. So life could have got multiple starts over time, and possibly multiple starts in different physical conditions and locations on the Earth early on. But whatever happened in that early phase of experimentation, everything we can see about the life around us on the Earth now indicates it came from one root, one common biological ancestor. Modern metabolism is a complex system of energy utilization, which is one of the key defining elements of life. So what did the first life look like structurally? The first living organisms were called prokaryotes, a single-celled organism lacking a membrane-bound nucleus or function-specific organelles that we see in our cells, human cells. So these are the simplest form of cells, essentially just a chemical container just a distant cousin of the micelles that concentrated chemicals on the very early Hadean Earth. These early prokaryotes thrived in warm water, using hydrogen sulfide from hydrothermal vents as an energy source to drive the metabolic processes. And one of the ways we know this is by looking at the tree of life in terms of the genetic material. And we can see that the present-day cousins that are closest to the root ancestor in the tree of life are thermophilic or heat-loving organisms, providing strong but indirect evidence that life started in a warm environment, probably warmer than the surface of the Earth would have been at that time, but similar to what a hydrothermal vent would have been. And as we've said, the ocean is a welcoming, sheltered environment for biology. Other early creatures we see in the history of life on Earth, based on fossil evidence and geochemical evidence, are called Cyanobacteria. These are single-celled bacteria that form giant coordinated biomats in the oceans of the early Earth. Stromatolites are another example of these formations. These are bacterial mats, the fossilized sarcophagi of large bacterial colonies. So at this point in the Earth's history, about 2.5 to 3 billion years ago, bacteria, or tiny microbes, are actually forming colonies or collections rather than being single and individual in the rock or in the ocean. Cyanobacteria were the first known biological form of life to photosynthesize. And colonies of cyanobacteria still exist on the Earth, and they grow on mineral surfaces in the photic zone where light can penetrate of shallow seas. Over time, minerals and sediments will precipitate on top of the cyanobacterial biomat. The cyanobacterial can then grow upward through the sediment to maintain access to sunlight. And so we see these layered formations, cabbage-like,